We're going to touch on 4 topics. We'll try to do it in a non-mechanical way. But I want to hear from each of them a short account of how they became good workers. Now, one of the aspects of being a good worker is that you're modest and humble, which doesn't mean you don't have an ego. They're not opposites. So we're not going to let them deny that they're good workers. We're going to assume, take that as an assumption. But to talk about the paths that they followed, and to include the obstacles, the missteps, because it's never, as we've heard, it's never as smooth going forward as it is when you give the narrative going backwards. Then I'd like to hear any thoughts that they've had at the conference as a result of both the official and informal interactions. And then finally, and I don't know what any of them is going to say, over the next 3 to 5 years, what do they most hope that they can accomplish and with whom they want to accomplish it?
I don't think I started off thinking I'd be a good worker. I just had, probably in hindsight, I look at certain incidents or the way life played out, which allowed me to reach or do the work I am doing. First, I think I attribute it to being the youngest child. I think by the time I came on to the family, there was so much more ease of parenting. I think that allows you to have a mindset, and it starts building a certain mindset of saying, I can. Because you're the third and nobody's really bothered about you, and you cannot grow up. My dad was an exceptional person. He was the first machine tool designer of India. And he constantly talked to us about what Bill was talking about, the attitude of gratitude. The fact that nothing and nobody is indispensable. That was another thing he told me. He said nothing and nobody is indispensable. Finally, you have to go really deep within who you are. Then, of course, I shared what happened with my son in education. I took him out, and again, I think I have equal measures of being extremely shameless and insanely optimistic. So I always feel that, hey, I can do a better job. I think the moral compass started shifting in more acutely in the choices I started making once I got into this thing about starting the school. And I remember again, just 3 things quickly. The day I put the ad in the newspapers, I had calls from like 20 people who said, oh, I'm interested in seeing you. And I didn't have any building. I just had my home to start the schooling. So on the 26th of Jan 2001, I was taking these 20 people to call to come and see that I had a building, and I was not kidding. And that day, the earthquake struck. And it was the biggest earthquake that hit Gujarat. Okay, from suddenly we went to zone 5, and everybody who had called left. Nobody wanted to be in Ahmedabad if they didn't want it. My parents, my mom called me up and said, you've not started the school. Come back, you don't have to live in Ahmedabad. I mean, this is now a dangerous place. And for some reason, I don't know why, but I think I had put the ad. The fact that I made it visible, I needed to own up to that story. And then the year 1 that happened, I had just 20 people. I think most of them came to me because the kids didn't get into any other school. So they all came to me, and the first year I thought, wow, we've done great work. Now we'll be flooded by inquiries. Sat by the phone the second year, not a single call. Okay, because I remember a lot of those parents saying, but your children don't know how to read and write. I mean, you don't give exams. You should give tests. And I said, no, I'm not doing any of those. But literally, I think at that time, the choices started coming. And I said, no, I will not succumb to what the parental pressure is. I will do what's right by the child. And ever since that reaffirmation, and in a week we were full again. I think the reaffirmation, whenever I went back to the user and kept that user at the center, at the lens, I would be more courageous every day. And now I don't fear. I've just become so much more confident every day that I'm not scared.
For me, I today have a great sense of purpose about this work, for which I am very grateful. But it wasn't always so. The origins for me, in some ways, begin with family. My grandfather, who I never met, was a general in the Nationalist Chinese Air Force, and I grew up with kind of stories and legends of him and looking at his image. And his name in Chinese was Liu Guoyun. And if you you speak Mandarin, Liu is the family name, but Guo Yun basically means deliverance of the nation. No pressure, right? And so I grew up with this idea that Liu's serve, Liu's contribute, Liu's participate in some way. And it was just this ethic. My parents were immigrant parents. They were not particularly involved in political civic life. And they didn't explicitly talk about what we would call good work. But like Kiran's father, they were very, in ways that I now appreciate myself as a father, they were very intentionally hands-off. I suppose you could say atypically Chinese parents. As I started to meander and explore and wanted to do things that had nothing to do with the traditional expectations of what a second-generation kid ought to be studying or dreaming of being. And for the first decade plus after I left college, I worked in public service, basically. I worked in government in Washington, D.C. I began to write books about public issues like race. And that period of time, however, was very kind of unwittingly purposeful. I was not conscious of it. I was not trying to do good work. I was not intending except to follow my heart, follow my nose, and follow this, vaguely instilled sense of Guo Yun, right? But after about a decade, number one, I became a father. Number two, I moved out from D.C. to the other Washington, to Seattle. And this is a period of about 3-4 years where I would say I got lost. A voice began to speak in my head that there were certain things, particularly now that I was a dad, that I ought to do. Right? There was no longer a voice of what I felt compelled to do. There was this you ought to. And there was always this voice, because I spent all this time in the public sector, you ought to go into business. You ought to get some business experience. Right? And so I did. My first few years in Seattle were at a digital media company called Real Networks, which some of you may have heard of. And those years there, on the one hand, were an incredible education in business and technology. On the other hand, they were years in which I, by choice, walked away from a sense of purpose and fell into this funk of, wait a minute, I'm doing work that's cool and cutting edge, and but at the end of the day, what I'm doing is enabling folks to be able to sell music and movies online faster, right? And I realized, wait a minute, all those years of unwittingly having had a sense of purpose that made me take for granted what it means to both have gratitude about that work and to have a sense of purpose that was greater than oneself. And so I quit. And I quit without a plan or without a net, but I quit with this strong instinct that I felt like I had to listen to, which was to go out in search of great teachers and mentors. And this journey ended up being about 1.5 years, and led to a book that I wrote called Guiding Lights, about great life-changing mentors and teachers. And from that point on, spending all that time with a couple of hundred remarkable guiding lights from all these different walks of life was one of the most formative experiences I could possibly have had. And it just kind of re-imprinted in me the sense of do work that feeds a sense of purpose, and that oftentimes the best way to go about finding your own purpose is to help guide and lead someone else to theirs.
I think it's a real mistake to think of good work as a selfless act. I do it because it's rewarding, and I imagine that's why all of you do it. It's not selfless at all. It's very fulfilling for us, and I think that's a really important message, because if we're trying to get kids to be excited about connecting their academic learning to a noble purpose and let them know that it's a fulfilling, great life when you do is really important. It's not a selfless life. I can name some ways in which it's personally rewarding for me. On a very selfish level, before the national work that I've done, I spent almost 29 years teaching in the small town where I live. So everyone who lives in my town who's younger than 45 is a former student of mine, basically. So my nurse is my former student, and my plumber is my former student, and or volunteer fire department are all my former students.
And these are all dealing with perilous occupations. You're dependent on this.
Exactly. But that's my point, is that there's a direct personal reward. For me, if they have good ethics, if they have an ethic of excellence in what they do, I benefit personally, and so does my whole community. That more than their test scores, the fact that they have a deep ethic of doing things well, that good work is part of who they are, makes my life personally better in that community. So it's very selfish in that way. And I have to say that I was a public elementary school teacher for 28 years, and it was personally fulfilling the entire time for me. It was inspirational for me. And it wasn't, what I got from it was not the traditional things that one would imagine. My salary was terrible. I live in a very small, low-income community. I mean, I'll be candid here. I never made $50,000 with 28 years experience of teaching public school. So in some countries, that would be a lot of money. In this country, I worked as a carpenter for all that time, on weekends and vacations and summers, just to support my family on what I was earning. So the fulfillment wasn't financial in that. And it wasn't status, because, I'll be candid about this. To be a male elementary school teacher is really low status in this country. Everyone I met said, why are you not a principal yet? Or why are you not teaching in higher ed yet? Or you're not even teaching high school? And the idea that after 25 years I had gone nowhere, but I was still teaching public elementary school, I have to say, my father was deeply ashamed of what I did. I had been a very successful student, and frankly, he felt like I had given my life away to what he considered a woman's job. So,
That's hard.
yeah, so there was no status, there was no money. Why do it for 25 years? The work that my students did in transforming our community was a constant source of inspiration to me. And as Wendy mentioned, I live in a town where everything is volunteer. The leadership of the town is volunteer, the fire department is volunteer. I mean, it's just a small town without paid people. There is a road crew, but it's 2 guys. One of them, my former student. So when things needed to happen in town, when we needed a demographic study to figure out where to do new houses, when we needed to test houses for radon, when we needed to test the water to see if our drinking water was safe, students did all of that work. And they were elementary students. And I think we as a nation vastly underestimate the capacity of kids to do great work. And entrusting these kids with the importance of really doing things to protect our lives as a community had them really step up in their life. And 10 years ago, when I switched to full-time national work with the nonprofit I work with now, Expeditionary Learning, the idea that urban students couldn't do this as well as our rural students, they were all low income, why did it matter? The entire time I was speaking and writing about my work, people saw the slides of my students and they saw that they were white and they assumed that they were wealthy. And they said, this is great, but it couldn't work in our school because our school is low income. And often they meant our school, there are kids of color, and your kids are white, and so we need to focus only on basic skills in our school. We can't focus on good work. And so for me, it became a personal mission that my archive of student work, which is hundreds and hundreds of products, 300 of which I brought with me in a suitcase here, most of those products are now from low-income students of color in urban communities. Because it's just as possible there. There's no reason why not. Which, Kiran, I think you showed so beautifully in your work. So I think it was changing that paradigm that it doesn't matter at all where the students are. I feel like everyone is capable of that kind of work. And the last thing I'll say, Howard, is the biggest challenge in my work has been that people think we need to make a choice between achievement in standard measures, like test scores and college acceptances, and a dedication to work that's meaningful and great. And I think it's a false choice. By connecting kids' work to something that's noble, there's a virtuous part of kids that gets unleashed, and that energy fuels their hard work in everything they do. So the fact that they all go to college and all have that mission is exactly connected.